Joaquin Guzman Loera was born on the 4th of April, 1957, in the small village of La Tuna, Sinaloa, Mexico. Life in this rural part of Mexico was tough. His family relied on subsistence farming, growing maize and beans, but it wasn't enough to escape poverty. Like many families in the Sierra Madre Mountains, they also cultivated opium poppies and marijuana, not for luxury, but to make ends meet. From a young age, Joaquin understood that survival meant hard work and resourcefulness. His father, a cattle rancher, was known for his short temper and strict discipline, often taking his frustrations out on his children. Joaquin, small for his age, earned the nickname El-Chapo, a reference to his short and stocky build. School was not a priority in La Tuna. Many children, including El-Chapo, received only a few years of formal education before working in the fields. By his early teens, Joaquin had already become familiar with the basics of drug production, how to cultivate poppies, extract opium, and process it for sale. But he wanted more than just farming. He wanted a way out of poverty. At 15 years old, he left home and ventured into the world of drug trafficking. He found work under Pedro Aviles Perez, one of the first major Mexican drug traffickers. Aviles was an experienced smuggler, moving marijuana and heroin into the United States. He ran his operation like a business, managing contacts, paying off law enforcement, and controlling key smuggling routes. Joaquin quickly gained Aviles' trust. He was not only loyal and hardworking, but he also had a sharp mind for logistics. He understood that controlling routes and transportation was just as important as producing the drugs. It was a lesson that would shape his future in the industry. In the 1970s, the Mexican drug trade was still developing. There were no major cartels yet, just independent traffickers moving product across the border. But that was about to change. By the early 1980s, the Mexican drug trade had entered a new phase. The demand for cocaine in the United States was exploding, and traffickers saw an opportunity to expand beyond marijuana and heroin. One man, in particular, had a vision for how to transform drug smuggling in Mexico: Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. Gallardo was the leader of the Guadalajara cartel, the first major organized crime group in Mexico. Unlike smaller traffickers who operated in secrecy, Gallardo built a network that connected Mexico with Colombian suppliers, US distributors, and corrupt government officials. He realized that instead of competing with the Medellin and Cali cartels, they could work together. Mexico would handle transportation, and Colombia would supply the cocaine. El-Chapo quickly rose through the ranks under Gallardo's leadership. He was efficient, reliable, and ruthless when necessary. His main responsibility: overseeing cocaine transportation across the US border. But he didn't rely on traditional methods. He came up with a more efficient way. El-Chapo pioneered underground smuggling tunnels, allowing drugs to move undetected. His tunnels weren't simple holes in the ground. They were well-engineered passageways, complete with lighting, ventilation, and even rail systems. One of the first tunnels, discovered in 1990 in Douglas, Arizona, stretched 1,500 feet from Mexico into the United States. This innovation gave El-Chapo an advantage. While other traffickers struggled to bribe border officials or hide drugs in vehicles, his network moved massive shipments with almost no risk. By the late 1980s, he had become one of Gallardo's most trusted men. But everything was about to change. In 1985, the Mexican drug world was shaken by a major event: the murder of the agent Enrique Kiki Camarena. Camarena had been working undercover, gathering intelligence on the Guadalajara cartel. But when the cartel discovered his activities, they saw him as a threat. He was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. His body was found weeks later, causing an international scandal. The US government pressured Mexico to take action, and in 1989, Gallardo was arrested. Without its leader, the Guadalajara cartel collapsed. But instead of disappearing, its members formed their own cartels. Splitting control of drug routes across Mexico, the Tijuana cartel was taken over by the Arellano Felix brothers. The Juarez cartel was led by Amado Carlo Fuentes, and the Sinaloa cartel, the group that would one day become the most powerful of them all, was led by El-Chapo Guzman. At first, there was an unspoken agreement between these new cartels. Each group controlled specific territories, and as long as they stayed in their own regions, conflict could be avoided. But peace in the drug world never lasts long. In the 1990s, the Sinaloa cartel expanded aggressively. El-Chapo wasn't just focused on cocaine. He was smuggling heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana as well. His cartel controlled routes through Sonora, Chihuahua, and Baja California, and his tunnels made smuggling faster and safer. But his growing influence put him at odds with the Tijuana cartel, led by the Arellano Felix brothers. In 1993, tensions escalated into full-scale violence. The Arellano Felix brothers ordered an assassination attempt on El Chapo at the Guadalajara International Airport, but the hitmen mistakenly killed Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, a well-known religious figure. The murder of a high-ranking Catholic leader shocked the nation. The Mexican government, under pressure from the Vatican and the US, launched a nationwide crackdown on drug lords. In June 1993, El Chapo was arrested in Guatemala and extradited to Mexico, where he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Many believed this was the end of his empire, but El Chapo had other plans. While sitting in his solitary confinement cell, El Chapo wasn't thinking about how he'd serve his time, he was thinking about how to get out. Even though he was constantly watched, his cartel still had access to billions of dollars and highly skilled engineers. He knew that money could buy anything, even freedom. His trusted men disguised themselves as construction workers. They purchased land 1 mile away from the prison, using heavy-duty machinery. They began digging a secret tunnel, one of the most sophisticated escape routes ever built. The tunnel was not some small, crude hole in the ground. It was a high-tech passageway equipped with electric light and ventilation systems, a motorcycle on a rail track to speed up his escape. They dug day and night, ensuring that every inch of the tunnel lined up perfectly beneath El Chapo's cell. And then, on the 11th of July, 2015, everything was in place. It was a normal evening in Altiplano prison. Guards were watching El Chapo's cell through surveillance cameras. At 8:52 p.m., he walked into his bathroom area, a small, blind spot in the camera's view. Seconds later, he was gone. The tunnel opened directly underneath his shower. He climbed down a 30-foot ladder, jumped on the motorcycle waiting for him, and sped through the underground passageway. By the time prison guards realized he was missing, he was already free. Within hours, he had disappeared without a trace. El Chapo's escape was a global embarrassment for Mexico. The US government was furious, calling for immediate action. Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto faced backlash, as critics accused him of failing to control corruption. The entire world was stunned. How could a maximum security prison allow the most wanted man to escape? The manhunt began immediately. Mexico deployed thousands of soldiers. The US offered a $5 million reward for his capture. His family and close associates were placed under surveillance. But tracking El Chapo was never easy. For 6 months, he remained hidden, constantly moving between mountain hideouts and underground tunnels. Then, in late 2015, something unexpected happened. Despite being the most wanted man in the world, El Chapo was obsessed with his own legend. He saw himself not just as a drug lord, but as a mythical figure, someone whose story deserved to be told on the big screen. That's when he made a critical mistake. He secretly arranged a meeting with actor Sean Penn and Mexican actress Kate Del Castillo. He believed they could help him make a movie about his life. In October 2015, the meeting took place in the mountains of Sinaloa. They discussed everything from his childhood to his drug empire. Sean Penn later wrote about this encounter in Rolling Stone magazine, calling it one of the most surreal interviews of his life. But what El Chapo didn't know was that Mexican intelligence was watching. Authorities tracked Penn and Del Castillo's movements and used their meeting as a way to close in on El Chapo's location. And this time, they wouldn't let him slip away. On the 8th of January, 2016, Mexican Marines launched a surprise raid on a safe house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. Gunfire erupted, with El Chapo's men fighting back. The Marines stormed the house, clearing each room. El Chapo and his right-hand man fled through a tunnel, but Marines followed them. Realizing he had nowhere left to run, El Chapo emerged from a manhole and tried to escape in a stolen car. But just moments later, he was captured. After 6 months on the run, El Chapo was back in custody. But this time, Mexico wasn't taking any chances. They immediately moved him back to Altiplano prison. The US demanded his extradition to ensure he would never escape again. His criminal empire, though still powerful, was shaken. El Chapo's legendary escapes had come to an end. Or had they? On the 8th of January, 2016, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was captured once again. But this time, things were different. There would be no escape tunnels. There would be no bribed prison guards. There would be no second chances. The Mexican government knew that as long as El Chapo remained in Mexico, he would always find a way out. So, after years of pressure from the United States, they finally agreed to extradite him. On the 19th of January, 2017, just one day before Donald Trump's inauguration as US President, El Chapo was flown to the United States under maximum security. His final battle was about to begin. The US wasn't just putting El Chapo on trial for drug trafficking. They were charging him with murder, racketeering, money laundering, and leading a criminal enterprise. He faced 17 federal charges. The government presented over 300,000 pages of evidence. The trial would take place in Brooklyn, New York, under unprecedented security measures. El-Chapo was placed in the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Manhattan, one of the most secure prisons in the US. He was kept in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, not allowed to see or speak to his wife, Emma Coronel, monitored by cameras and armed guards at all times. There would be no tunnels this time. Dubbed the trial of the century, El-Chapo's court proceedings were one of the most heavily guarded and high-profile trials in modern history. Armed U.S. Marshals transported him to court in a convoy of armored vehicles. The Brooklyn Bridge was shut down every time he was moved. The courtroom was filled with lawyers, journalists, and former cartel members who turned witnesses. For 3 months, prosecutors unraveled his empire, presenting shocking evidence, intercepted phone calls proving his direct orders to kill rivals, testimonies from former cartel members, who described his brutal methods, photos and videos of his drug shipments, worth billions. One of the most damning testimonies came from Vicente Zambada, the son of El-Chapo's former partner Ismael El Mayo Zambada. Vicente revealed, El-Chapo bribed top Mexican officials, including presidents. He ordered tortures and executions, often personally overseeing them. His cartel smuggled cocaine into the US using submarines, planes, and trains. El-Chapo denied everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. And on the 12th of February, 2019, the jury reached a verdict. After 6 days of deliberation, the jury found Joaquin El-Chapo Guzman guilty on all 10 counts. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. He was ordered to forfeit $12.6 billion, the estimated value of his drug profits. The judge declared, "The overwhelming evil of your crimes is staggering." On the 19th of July, 2019, El-Chapo was transferred to ADX Florence, the most secure supermax prison in the US, also known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This would be his final prison, a place no one has ever escaped from. At ADX Florence in Colorado, El-Chapo is in total isolation. He spends 23 hours a day in a concrete cell. His only human interaction is with guards. He has no internet, no phone calls, and no chance of escape. For a man who once commanded armies of killers and billions of dollars, he is now just another prisoner in a concrete box. His wife, Emma Coronel, was also arrested in 2021 for helping him run the cartel. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, though she was released in 2023. The Sinaloa cartel still exists, but without El-Chapo, it's not the same. Today, his former partners, including El Mayo Zambada and El-Chapo's own sons, Los Chapitos, run different factions of the cartel, but they are constantly fighting both law enforcement and rival groups. The empire El-Chapo built is fractured, and his legendary escapes are nothing more than stories from the past. Joaquin El-Chapo Guzman went from a poor boy selling oranges to one of the most powerful drug lords in history. He built a global empire worth billions. He escaped from prison twice, outsmarting governments. He became a mythical figure, feared and admired. But in the end, crime has a cost. Now, he sits alone in a tiny prison cell, forgotten by many, remembered by some. His story isn't just about power and wealth. It's about how even the most untouchable criminals eventually fall. And for El-Chapo, there will be no more tunnels, no more deals, and no more second chances. His reign is over.